is next week, or in a few weeks, I start back at work and I will be teaching the novel 1984 to my 16, 17-year-old students. And so I have to do some planning for that, so I thought I would do that alongside you. So I haven't started reading the book yet, so I'm gonna do that now. And I'm gonna make notes at the same time, so this video will be soft-spoken / whispered reading, as well as occasionally me taking notes. And I'm going to write the title. I don't know if you can see that. 1984. Okay, so there's my title. And then I'm gonna get pink highlighter. Just wait for it to dry a bit. Okay, so this is how I'm setting it up. Okay, so first things first is I'm going to start reading. So I have this version. And 1984, a lot of people, a lot of schools and countries around the world teach this, so there are a lot of resources online that I could use, but I thought I would make my own, and I've got 2 weeks till school starts, so and I've also got 3 other texts to teach, so I've got lots to do. So with the book, I'm gonna actually skip the introduction because I've actually already read it, and I've read half of chapter 1, but I thought I need a refresher, so I should probably just do it again. Okay, just want to see how many pages it is, because I might not get around to it all today. 22, it's about 19 pages, chapter 1. Okay. It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. Winston Smith, his chin nuzzled into his breast in an effort to escape the vile wind, slipped quickly through the glass doors of Victory Mansions, though not quickly enough to prevent a swirl of gritty dust from entering along with him. The hallway smelt of boiled cabbage and old rag mats. At one end of it, a coloured poster, too large for indoor display, had been tacked to the wall. It depicted simply an enormous face, more than metre wide, the face of a man of about 45, with a heavy black moustache and ruggedly handsome features. Winston made for the stairs. It was no use trying the lifts. Even at the best of times it was seldom working, and at present the electric current was cut off during daylight hours. It was part of the economy drive in preparation for Hate Week. The flat was 7 flights up, and Winston, who was 39 and had a varicose ulcer about his right ankle, went slowly, resting several times on the way. Okay, just gonna make a note about Winston. Winston. Of course, this pen isn't working. On each landing, opposite the lift shaft, the poster with the enormous face gazed from the wall. It was one of those pictures which is so contrived that the eyes follow you about when you move. Big Brother is watching you, the caption beneath it ran. Inside the flat, a fruity voice was reading out a list of figures which had something to do with the production of pig iron. The voice came from an oblong metal plaque, like a dulled mirror which formed part of the surface of the right-hand wall. Winston turned a switch, and the voice sank somewhat, though the words were still distinguishable. The instrument, the telescreen it was called, could be dimmed, but there was no way of shutting it off completely. He moved over to the window, a smallish, frail figure, the meagreness of his body merely emphasized by the blue overalls, which were the uniform of the party. His hair was very fair, his face naturally sanguine, his skin roughened by coarse soap and blunt razor blades, and the cold of the winter that had just ended. Outside, even through the shut window pane, the world looked cold. Down in the street, little eddies of wind were swirling dust and torn paper into spirals. And though the sun was shining and the sky a harsh blue, there seemed to be no colour in anything, except the posters that were plastered everywhere. The black, mustachioed face gazed down from every commanding corner. There was one in the house front immediately opposite. Big Brother is watching you, the caption said, while the dark eyes looked deep into Winston's own. Down at street level, another poster, torn at one corner, flapped fitfully in the wind, alternately covering and uncovering the single word, Ingsoc, I-N-G-S-O-C. In the far distance, a helicopter skimmed down between the roofs, hovered for an instant like a blue bottle, and darted away again with a curving flight. It was the police patrol, snooping into people's windows. The patrols did not matter, however. Only the thought police mattered. Behind Winston's back, the voice from the telescreen was still babbling away about pig iron and the overfulfillment of the 9th 3-year plan. The telescreen received and transmitted simultaneously any sound that Winston made above the level of a very low whisper would be picked up by it. Moreover, so long as he remained within the field of vision which the metal plaque commanded, he could be seen as well as heard. There was, of course, no way of knowing whether you were being watched at any given moment. How often, or on what system, the thought police plugged in on any individual wire was guesswork. It was even conceivable that they watched everybody all the time, but at any rate, they could plug in your wire whenever they wanted to. You had to live, did live, from habit. That became instinct, and the assumption that every sound you made was overheard, and, except in darkness, every movement scrutinized. Winston kept his back turned to the telescreen. It was safer, though as he well knew, even a back can be revealing. Kilometre away, the Ministry of Truth, his place of work, towered vast and white above the grimy landscape. This, he thought, with a sort of vague distaste. This was London, chief city of Airstrip 1, itself the third most populous of the provinces of Oceania. He tried to squeeze out some childhood memory that should tell him whether London had always been quite like this. Were there always these vistas of rotting 19th century houses? Their sides shored up with bulks of timber, their windows patched with cardboard and their roofs with corrugated iron, the crazy garden walls sagging in all directions, and the bombed sites where the plaster dust swirled in the air and the willow herb straggled over the heaps of rubble, and the places where the bombs had cleared a larger patch, and there had sprung up sordid colonies of wooden dwellings like chicken houses. But there was no news. He could not remember. Nothing remained of his childhood except a series of bright-lit tableaux, occurring against no background and mostly unintelligible. The Ministry of Truth, Minitrue in Newspeak, was startlingly different from any other object in sight. It was an enormous pyramidal structure of glittering white concrete, soaring up, terrace after terrace, 300 meters into the air. From where Winston stood, it was just possible to read, picking out on its white face, in elegant lettering, the three slogans of the party. War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. The Ministry of Truth contained, it was said, 3,000 rooms above ground level, and corresponding ramifications below. Scattered about London, there were just 3 other buildings of similar appearance and size. So completely did they dwarf the surrounding architecture that from the roof of Victory Mansions, you could see all 4 of them simultaneously. They were the homes of the 4 ministries between which the entire apparatus of government was divided. The Ministry of Truth, which concerned itself with news, entertainment, education, and the fine arts. The Ministry of Peace, which concerned itself with war. The Ministry of Love, which maintained law and order. At the Ministry of Plenty, which was responsible for economic affairs, their names in Newspeak, Minitrue, Minipax, Mini-Love, and Mini-Plenty. The Ministry of Love was the really frightening one. There were no windows in it at all. Winston had never been inside the Ministry of Love, nor within half a kilometre of it. It was a place impossible to enter, except on official business, and then only by penetrating through a maze of barbed wire, entanglements, steel doors, and hidden machine-gun nests. Even the streets leading up to its outer barriers were roamed by gorilla-faced guards in black uniforms, armed with jointed truncheons. Winston turned round abruptly. He had set his features into the expression of quiet optimism, which it was advisable to wear when facing the telescreen. He crossed the room into the tiny kitchen. By leaving the ministry at this time of day, he had sacrificed his lunch in the canteen, and he was aware that there was no food in the kitchen except a hunk of dark-coloured bread, which had got to be saved for tomorrow's breakfast. He took down from the shelf a bottle of colourless liquid with a plain white label marked Victory Gin. It gave off a sickly, oily smell, as of Chinese rice spirit. Winston poured out nearly a teacupful, nerved himself for a shock, and gulped it down like a dose of medicine. Instantly, his face turned scarlet and the water ran out of his eyes. The stuff was like nitric acid, and moreover, in swallowing it, one had the sensation of being hit on the back of the head with a rubber club. The next moment, however, the burning in his belly died down, and the world began to look more cheerful. He took a cigarette from a crumpled packet marked Victory Cigarettes, and incautiously held it upright, whereupon the tobacco fell out onto the floor. With the next he was more successful. He went back to the living room and sat down at a small table that stood to the left of the telescreen. From the table drawer he took out a pen holder, a bottle of ink, and a thick, quarto-sized blank book with a red back and a marbled cover. For some reason, the telescreen in the living room was in an unusual position. Instead of being placed as was normal in the end wall, where it could command the whole room, it was in the longer wall, opposite the window. To one side of it there was a shallow alcove in which Winston was now sitting, and which, when the flats were built, had probably been intended to hold bookshelves. By sitting in the alcove and keeping well back, Winston was able to remain outside the range of the telescreen, so far as sight went. He could be heard, of course, but so long as he stayed in his present position, he could not be seen. It was partly the unusual geography of the room that had suggested to him the thing that he was now about to do, but it had also been suggested by the book that he had just taken out the drawer. It was a peculiarly beautiful book. Its smooth, creamy paper, a little yellowed by age, was of a kind that had not been manufactured for at least 40 years past. He could guess, however, that the book was much older than that. He had seen it lying in the window of a frowsy little junk shop in a slummy quarter of the town. Just what quarter he did not now remember, and had been stricken immediately by an overwhelming desire to possess it. Party members were supposed not to go into ordinary shops. Dealing on the free market, it was called. But the rule was not strictly kept, because there were various things such as shoelaces and razor blades which it was impossible to get hold of in any other way. He had given a quick glance up and down the street, and then had slipped inside and bought the book for $2.50. At the time, he was not conscious of wanting it for any particular purpose. He'd carried it guiltily home in his briefcase. Even with nothing written in it, it was a compromising possession. Okay, I'm going to pause there for now because I'm going to make some notes on what I've read, so on setting, Winston's character, and some language features. London. Just after winter. Oh no. Spring. Colorless. Only colours from the posters. E2 Big Brother's always watching. Atmosphere seems ominous, dark, creepy. Always being watched, e.g. the telescreen facing the window, and also language features. We could talk about contrast, the ministries, e.g. Ministry of Peace is actually war, and irony too. Ministry of Love. I think Ministry of Love was about law and order. I think, is that right? Yeah, that was law and order. And of truth was news. Oh, and plenty was economic affairs. Okay, cool. So that's chapter 1. Where did I get to? Page. That was page 8. Okay. Cool, let's carry on. So I'm now on chapter 7. And I've got about 30 pages left until I'm up to part 2 of the book. So I've made a bit of progress today, which is awesome. And hopefully I can finish it quickly because I'm running out of time. Chapter 7. If there is hope, wrote Winston, it lies in the proles. If there was hope, it must lie in the proles, because only there, in those swarming disregarded masses, 85% of the population of Oceania, could the force to destroy the party ever be generated. The party could not be overthrown from within. Its enemies, if it had any enemies, had no way of coming together, or even of identifying one another. Even if the legendary brotherhood existed, as just possibly it might, it was inconceivable that its members could ever assemble in large numbers than 2s and 3s. Rebellion meant a look in the eyes, an inflection of the voice, at the most an occasional whispered word. But the proles, if only they could somehow become conscious of their own strength, would have no need to conspire. They needed only to rise up and shake themselves like a horse shaking off flies. If they chose, they could blow the party to pieces tomorrow morning. Surely sooner or later it must occur to them to do it. And yet, he remembered how once he had been walking down a crowded street when a tremendous shout of hundreds of voices, women's voices, had burst from a side street a little way ahead. It was a great, formidable cry of anger and despair, a deep, loud "oh" that went humming on like the reverberation of a bell. His heart had leapt. It started. He thought, a riot, the proles are breaking loose at last. When he had reached the spot, it was to see a mob of 200 or 300 women crowding around the stalls of a street market, with faces as tragic as though they had been the doomed passengers on a sinking ship. At this moment, the general despair broke down into a multitude of individual quarrels. It appeared that one of the stalls had been selling tin saucepans. They were wretched, flimsy things, but cooking pots of any kinds were always difficult to get. Now the supply had unexpectedly given out. The successful women, bumped and jostled by the rest, were trying to make off with their saucepans, while dozens of others clamoured round the stall, accusing the storekeeper of favouritism and of having more saucepans somewhere in reserve. There was a fresh outburst of yells. Two bloated women, one of them with her hair coming down, had got hold of the same saucepan and were trying to tear it out of one another's hands. For a moment they were both tugging, and then the candle came on. Winston watched them disgustedly, and yet just for a moment what almost frightening power had sounded in that cry from only a few hundred throats. Why was it that they could never shout like that about anything that mattered? He wrote. Until they become conscious that they will never rebel, and until after they have rebelled, they cannot become conscious. That, he reflected, might almost have been a transcription from one of the party textbooks. The party claimed, of course, to have liberated the proles from bondage. I think that might actually be a good quote too. They become conscious. They will never rebel. And until after they have rebelled, they cannot become conscious. Party slogan in a textbook. The party claimed, of course, to have liberated the proles from bondage. Before the revolution, they had been hideously oppressed by the capitalist. They had been starved and flogged. Women had been forced to work in the coal mines. Women still did work in the coal mines, as a matter of fact. Children had been sold into the factories at the age of 6, but simultaneously, true to the principles of doublethink, the party thought that the proles were natural inferiors who must be kept in subjection like animals by the application of a few simple rules. In reality, very little was known about the proles, but not necessary to know much, so long as they continued to work and breed. The other activities were without importance, left to themselves, like cattle turned loose upon the plains of Argentina. They had reverted to a style of life that had appeared to be natural to them, a sort of ancestral pattern. They were born, they grew up in the gutters, they went to work at 12, they passed through a brief blossoming period of beauty and sexual desire. They married at 20, they were middle-aged at 30, they died for the most part at 60. Heavy physical work, the care of home and children, petty quarrels with neighbours, films, football, beer, and above all, gambling filled up the horizons of their minds. To keep them in control was not difficult. Okay, they grew up. Footline controls. Few agents and thought police moved always among them. False rumours marking down the nominating the judge to
becoming dangerous, but no attempt was made to indoctrinate ideologies desirable for political feelings. All that was required of them, which could be appealed to whenever it was necessary. Indeed, they sometimes said, being an archer, they could only focus on Betty's specific notice. Wow. Oh my goodness. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so the proles. Work from 12 years old. So there's descriptions of the proles working from 12, middle-aged at 30, died around 60. Physical work, or caring for the home, and kids. Quarrels with neighbours. Film, football, beer, gambling, to fill their minds. This was used to keep them in control. Just had a sense of patriotism. So this definitely reflects to today's ideas about we are constantly distracted all the time by like alcohol, the mindless interactions that we have with people, and like for example the petty quarrels with neighbours, and football and sports and films, and women taking care of the home, and the father taking heavy physical work. These are things that have sort of maybe pushed humans away from their spiritual roots, or the innate spirituality that we have in connection to the universe and things like that. And I think these are in the sense of like a sense of consciousness, basically. Yeah, and I think that it's very ironic. I'm just gonna write that, ironic. Very ironic that in the text, the narrator is saying how, the proles are what other people who had to live in this way, they were almost animalistic. I think that's what I'm getting from this, and they're almost animalistic, and that's how we live now. We are constantly being distracted. This reflects the idea of always being distracted and not seeing like a clear sense of what is really going on, whatever that is. you know, that idea of control. Like, the country I live in, sport is like a major thing. Everyone loves sport. It's like a religion. It's like a religion in our country, and I think that it's almost like you see, like you'll be driving down the street, people will have flags of our national team outside their house, and you'll go anywhere and someone will have a t-shirt, sports team. And I'm not saying that's bad, but I'm saying it's very, like, people are passionate about sport, but if they were more eager to follow their religion or follow their I don't know, God or whatever it is, follow things that truly matter and would fulfill them, we may have a very different society, I guess, you know, like, yeah, I'm just gonna stop there, because I don't want to say anything too more controversial. Just like the idea of always being distracted by sometimes trivial things. Humans kept in control, and typically these are Western countries. I want to say that because there are countries I can think of in, like, Asia maybe, that are more connected to their spiritual side or religion, or, you know, can see what's going on. But I will say almost every society, majority of people are not conscious. They don't have consciousness in which they can see through lies and deceit that are being fed to us through mainstream media, whatever that is. Kept under control. Typically Western. I'm just gonna say typically Western. And even when they become discontented, as they sometimes did, the discontent led nowhere, because being without general ideas, they could only focus it on petty specific grievances. The larger evils invariably escaped their notice. The great majority of proles did not even have telescreens in their homes. Even the civil police interfered with them very little. There was a vast amount of criminality in London, the whole world, and a world of thieves, bandits, prostitutes, drug peddlers, and racketeers of every description. But since it all happened among the proles themselves, it was of no importance. In all questions of morals, they were allowed to follow their ancestral code. Promiscuity went unpunished. Divorce was permitted. For that matter, even religious worship would have been permitted if the proles had shown any sign of needing or wanting it. They were beneath suspicion. As the party slogan put it, proles and animals are free. Winston reached down and cautiously scratched his varicose ulcer. It began itching again. The thing you invariably came back to was the impossibility of knowing what life was before the revolution had really been like. He took out of the drawer a copy of a children's history textbook which he'd borrowed from Mrs. Parson, and began copying a passage into the diary. In the old days, it ran, before the glorious revolution, London was not the beautiful city that we know today. It was a dark, dirty, miserable place where hardly anybody had enough to eat, and where hundreds and thousands of poor people had no boots on their feet and not even a roof to sleep under. Children no older than you had to work 12 hours. Guys, I really need to eat so much. 12 hours a day for cruel masters.
He flogged them with whips if they worked too slowly, and fed them on nothing but stale bread crusts and water. But in among all this terrible poverty, there were just a few great big beautiful houses that were lived in by the rich men who had as many as 30 servants to look after them. These rich men were called capitalists. They were fat, ugly men with wicked faces, like the one in the picture on the opposite page. You can see that he's dressed in a long black coat, which was called a frock coat, and a queer shiny hat shaped like a stovepipe, which was called a top hat. This was the uniform of the capitalists, and no one else was allowed to wear it. The capitalists owned everything in the world, and everyone else was their slave. They owned all the land, all the houses, all the factories, and all the money. If anyone disobeyed them, they could throw him into prison, or they could take his job away and starve him to death. When any ordinary person spoke to a capitalist, he had to cringe and bow to him, and take off his cap and address him as Sir. The chief of all the capitalists was called the King, but he knew the rest of the catalogue. There would be mention of the bishops in their lawn sleeves, the judges in their ermine robes, the pillory, the stocks, the treadmill, the cat o' nine tails, the Lord Mayor's banquet, and the practice of kissing the Pope's toe. There was also something called the Jus Plumet Noctis, which would I don't know if I said that right, I know I keep saying words wrong, which would probably not be mentioned in textbook for children. It was a law by which every capitalist had the right to sleep with any woman working in one of his factories. How could you tell how much of it was lies? It might be true that the average human being was better off now than he had been before the revolution. The only evidence to the contrary was the meat proteins in your own bones, instinctive feeling that the conditions you lived in were intolerable, and that some of the time they must have been different. It struck him that the truly characteristic thing about modern life was not its cruelty and insecurity, but simply its bareness, its dinginess, its listlessness. Life, if you looked about you, bore no resemblance, not only to the lies that streamed out of the telescreens, but even to the ideals that the party was trying to achieve. Great areas of it, even for a party member, were neutral and non-political, a matter of slogging through dreary jobs, fighting for a place on the tube, darning a worn-out sock, catching such a rhyme tablet, saving a cigarette end. The ideal set up by the party was something huge, terrible, and glittering. Walls of steel and concrete, monstrous machines of terrifying weapons, a nation of warriors and fanatics marching forward in perfect unity, all thinking the same thoughts and shouting the same slogans. Winston recognizes that he'll always be unsure of what is real, the truth, after reading and listening to the decades of information fed to the people by the party in textbooks and telescreens. Okay. Some Testaments, starving children, street bags.
granted. Or else follows. Here we go, page 84. Okay, now chapter 8. From somewhere at the bottom of the passage, the smell of roasting coffee, real coffee, not victory coffee, came flitting out into the street. Winston paused involuntarily. For perhaps 2 seconds he was back in the half-forgotten world of his childhood. Then a door banged, seeming to cut off the smell as abruptly as though it had been a sound. This was the second time in 3 weeks they had missed an evening at the community centre. A rash act, since you could be certain that the number of your attendances at the centre was carefully checked. In principle, the party member had no spare time, and was never alone except in bed. It was assumed that when he was not working, eating or sleeping, he would be taking part in some kind of communal recreations. To do anything that suggested a taste for solitude, even to go for a walk by yourself, was always slightly dangerous. There was a word for it in Newspeak, own life, it was called, meaning individualism and eccentricity. But this evening, as he came out of the ministry, the balminess of the April air had tempted him. The sky was a warmer blue than he had seen it that year, and suddenly the long, noisy evening at the centre, the boring, exhausting games, the lectures, the creaking camaraderie oiled by gin, had seemed intolerable. On impulse, he had turned away from the bus stop and wandered off into the labyrinth of London, first south, then east, then north again, losing himself among unknown streets and hardly bothering in which direction he was going. If there is hope, he had written in the diary, it lies in the pearls. The words kept coming back to him, a statement of a mystical truth and a palpable absurdity. He was somewhere in the vague, brown-coloured slums to the north and east of what had once been St. Pancras Station. He was walking up a cobbled street of little two-storey houses with battered doorways which gave straight onto the pavement, and which were somehow curiously suggestive of rat holes. There were puddles of filthy water. There were puddles of filthy water here and there among the cobbles, in and out of the dark doorways, and down narrow alleyways, branched off on either side. People swarmed in astonishing numbers, girls in full bloom, with crudely lipstick mouths, and youths who chased the girls, and swollen, waddling women who showed you what the girls would be like in 10 years' time, and old bent creatures shuffling along on splayed feet, and ragged, barefooted children who played in the puddles and scattered angry yells from their mothers. Perhaps a quarter of the windows in the street were broken and boarded up. Most of the people paid no attention to Winston. A few eyed him with a sort of guarded curiosity. As 2 monstrous women, with brick-red forearms folded across their aprons, were talking outside a doorway. Monstrous women? That's so mean. Winston caught scraps of conversation as he approached. Yes, I said to her, that's all very well, he says, but if you'd have been in my place, you'd have done the same as what I done. It's easy to criticize, I says, but you ain't got the same problems as what I got. Ah, said the other, that's just it. That's just where it is. The strident voices stopped abruptly. The woman studied him in hostile silence as he went past. But it was not hostility exactly, merely a kind of wariness, the momentary stiffening as at the passing of some unfamiliar animal. The blue overalls of the party could not be a common sight in a street like this. Indeed, it was unwise to be seen in such places unless you had definite business there. The patrols might stop you if you happened to run into them. May I see your papers, comrade? What are you doing here? What time did you leave work? Is this your usual way home? And so on and so forth. Not that there was any rule against walking home by an unusual route, but it was enough to draw attention to you if the thought police heard about it. street was in commotion. There were yells of warning from all sides. People were shooting in the doorways like rabbits. A young woman leapt out of a doorway, a little ahead of Winston, grabbed up a tiny child playing in a bottle, whipped her apron round it, and leapt back again, all in one movement. At the same time, a man in a concertina-like black suit, who had emerged from a side alley, ran towards Winston, pointing excitedly to the sky. "Steamer," he yelled. "Look out, Governor, bang over it. Lay down quick." Steamer was a nickname which, for some reason, the proles applied to rocket bombs. Winston promptly flung himself on his face. Oh, I just realised why it's called proles. I think it stands for proletariat. Let me just double check. Oceania's vast working class, 85% of the population living in poverty. They possess more freedom from constant surveillance. Yeah. There was a little pile of plaster lying on the pavement ahead of him, and in the middle of it he could see a bright red streak. When he got up to it, he saw that it was a human hand severed at the wrist. Apart from the bloody stump, the hand was so completely whitened as to resemble a plaster cast. He kicked the thing into the gutter and then, to avoid the crowd, turned down a side street to the right. Within 3 or 4 minutes he was out of the area which the bomb had affected in the sordid swimming of life. Chapter 8. Earlier. Page 88. So, earlier in the text, I think it was earlier in the chapter maybe, text, the narrator says, early in the text, the narrator says that the proles were definitely concerned with gambling. The narrator explains proles' deep concern for maybe not concern, but deep want, maybe desire, deep desire. Let's just say desire. I'll think of a different word for gambling. So then there's also the lottery, which seemed to be only reason for proles staying alive, despite their lack of education. They concerned themselves with the calculations, memorization, in order to win the weekly payouts and prizes organized by the Ministry of Plenty. The prizes
imaginary jury, which is known to party members. So basically, all the prizes that the proles win in the lottery are just an illusion. And each week, the proles, they develop their skills in their memorization and their calculations despite lacking an education, not being able to read or write. They're still able to supposedly win in the lottery, not having much skill. And the party members know that the prizes are imaginary, they're small, they're not always only small sums were actually paid out. The winners of the big prizes are non-existent people in the absence of any real intercommunication between one part of Lucy and another. This was not difficult to arrange. Yeah. So small payouts for imaginary people. Yeah, so the whole reason I wrote this particular part down was you can parallel it to the lottery that we have today in a lot of Western countries. And but also in the same way, it could be like when people do well at work, or there's the idea of work hard and you can also win. You can also win in life. You can make money. You can work towards the top, but it's an illusion. The system will always keep you in line, keep you at a certain ranking. I'm not saying I agree with everything that's being implied in this book. Also, this is also me just implying very much. But I think it's a good message and a good metaphor for for young people to understand. Yeah, this is a very heavy book. Very heavy. I'm just saying it could reflect the idea that if you work hard, you can achieve and build wealth, work way up ladder. These are through these small benefits that you get. Small benefits or perceived successes that will continue to push people to try hard. However, they are still part of a wider system that keeps them in control and subordinate to a higher So like, it also is a perception that the party slash higher power, if we're talking about a wider context, wider world context, it's the perception that they're trying to help you out, you know, that we're trying to help you, we're trying to give you this and this and this to help you achieve and boost you up so you can also make this money or whatever. But it's all an illusion. Party are trying to help you, an illusion to keep support and people in line. Okay, so with that, I'm going to stop for now, but thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. It was very different. I haven't seen this like hybrid reading and writing style been done before, but maybe it has. I just wanted to try something new. So yeah, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next video.